This is Larry Jordan, the host of the Digital Production Buzz. The following interview is an excerpt from a recent program. To hear the entire program, visit digitalproductionbuzz.com. David Tillman is a documentary editor, most recently known for his work on the TV documentary O.J. Speaks: The Hidden Tapes. He also produced and edited the upcoming Challenger disaster, Lost Tapes. His credits now include more than 18 major TV documentaries for networks such as MSNBC, National Geographic Channel, Smithsonian Channel, and PBS. Hello, David. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
We are looking forward to talking to you. But before we talk about the O.J. tapes, what first got you interested in documentaries?
That's a good question. I actually went to film school at the University of Texas in Austin. I took a documentary class there that focused on East Austin, which is kind of the minority section of Austin with kind of important stories that maybe weren't being told. And I worked on some short documentaries for that class, and I really fell in love with, telling people's stories.
Well, because you were just starting out, who was the most influential teacher you had, either in terms of teaching you the technology or teaching you storytelling?
Well, actually, dating back to high school, we actually had film and television classes at Columbia High School in Maplewood, New Jersey, where I grew up. So there was a guy named Frank X. Mullen there that was kind of an early mentor. And actually, my freshman year of high school, I was editing on linear editing systems, tape to tape. And then my sophomore year, they got something called Avid Cinema, which is kind of like a precursor to iMovie or something. So I actually started editing, nonlinear editing, sophomore in high school, which would have been 1998. Kind of took it from there because I always kind of wanted to make my own films, and naturally the easiest way to do that is if you can edit them yourself. So that was kind of how I got into editing, just as a means to an end, trying to tell stories.
Well, before we go on, we're talking about film schools. University of Texas, considered one of the best film schools in the country. Looking back on it, was it for you? I love people talking about their education experience in film, and was it worth it?
I mean, for me, like I said, because I got into it in high school, there's really nothing else I wanted to study in college. I mean, that was I couldn't wait to continue, making films and stuff. So I love my experience at the University of Texas. I feel like there was kind of a good vibe there in terms of it wasn't ultra competitive like I hear some film schools are in terms of getting access to equipment and stuff like that. And everyone was just kind of willing to work on each other's projects and had some great professors. So I had no regrets about that. And in fact, there's a number of kids that I went to film school with who are out in LA now working. So I think
Good.
when it comes down to it, that's kind of one of the most important things is the network that you create in college. If those people are going to work in the industry, those are going to be some of your contacts. And that's in a way one of the biggest things that comes out of film school is the people that you met there. So.
David, you've worked on over 18 major documentaries. At least that's what your website says. What are some of the projects? What are some of the projects you've worked on?
Well, I started working with a filmmaker named Tom Jennings about 5 years ago, and like I said, that was something that actually came out of one of my friends from film school who's working with him, and then he was starting a series called True Crime with Aphrodite Jones for Investigation Discovery, and I got a job working on that. So from there, I kind of moved up from assistant editor to editor, and I've been working with him ever since. So I've run the gamut on different topics such as crime. I've done stuff on Ted Bundy and other killers like the I-5 Strangler. I did a kind of a legal documentary about the Casey Anthony defense.
I'm getting depressed just hearing the titles.
I know.
For MSNBC. And then I think one of the ones I'm more proud of was the MLK, the assassination tapes, which won a Peabody Award in 2012. And then a Fidel Castro documentary for PBS last year that was nominated for a News and Documentary Emmy. So I've gotten to delve into a lot of historical topics, which has been great because I wasn't really interested in history before I started making these kind of films, and I get to kind of delve into a topic for 3 or 4 months and learn all about it, and I really enjoy that.
Well, I want to shift gears to a specific project and drop a name. Chuck Braverman dropped into the studio about 30 seconds before we went on the air.
Oh, really?
He was just here.
So he was telling us about a project that both of you were working on called OJ Speaks, The Hidden Tapes. How did you get involved with that project, and tell us about what it is?
Well, that came to me kind of because Chuck knows this guy, Tom Jennings, that I work with, and I guess they were looking for a writer-producer to help with that project. And when they, checked in with Tom, he said, well, I have this editor that I typically work with, so they brought me in. So that's kind of how I got involved, and I was immediately very excited to work on it because I heard that there were going to be something like 30 hours of deposition tapes of O.J. Simpson testifying about his possible involvement in the death of Nicole and Ron. So, as an editor, there's kind of nothing more enticing than knowing that you're going to be looking at footage that few people have ever seen. And that was, just, the kind of thing that you dream of, is just getting to kind of sit back and watch through this sort of rare footage that few eyes have been able to get a look at.
Speaking of all that rare footage, how much rare footage do you have to go through in order to tell that story? Are you looking at hours and hours of rare footage, or footage in general?
Yeah, I mean, luckily for that, there might have been something like 30 hours. There were transcripts for all of it, so you could kind of read through a little bit to key in on some interesting lines of questioning that we knew would be related to some of the material that we were presenting in the documentary. So, we definitely were looking for moments where OJ would show some emotion, anger, frustration, where he would be caught in a lie. We were looking for those kind of moments, but we were also kind of looking for lines of questioning from the lawyers that supported the story we were telling.
Well, let's talk about your workflow for just a minute. You've got way more hours than you can put into a documentary. How did you decide to narrow it down? Clearly on the emotional moments, but I want to switch to the technology for a moment. How did you decide to narrow it down? How many people on your editorial team, and what software did you use?
Well, for this particular project, it was my first chance to use Final Cut 10. So that was kind of interesting. I actually just wrote an article about this for fcp.co, which will probably be coming out in the next few days. But essentially, Chuck Braverman wanted to cut this project on Final Cut 10 because they were already working on another documentary about the O.J. Simpson trial, where they had already been ingesting a lot of archival footage and stuff, logging it, and keywording everything in Final Cut 10. So even though I had no experience, they kind of said, you can learn on the job, and there's this guy, Patrick Southern, who I know you guys know, who used to be a Final Cut 10 trainer, actually, for Apple. He was an assistant editor on the project, and they kind of said, hey, Patrick can sit right next to you, and he can just answer all your questions. So for the next 2 weeks or so, just ask Patrick was kind of my mantra. I just asked him basically every little thing that popped into my head, and luckily he didn't get too frustrated with the repeated and simple questions that I had. So I quickly learned to love Final Cut 10.
Wait a minute, what? You quickly learned to love it?
Yeah, it didn't
Really?
take long. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I knew Final Cut and Avid before that. I'd used both of those, but had kind of a love-hate relationship with Avid, and I found like Final Cut 10 with some of the kind of changes they made allowed my storytelling side of my brain to kind of come out without being bogged down by some of the sort of technical stuff about editing that isn't really my favorite, I guess, aspect of it. When you talk about workflow, I mean, luckily for this project, Tom Jennings wrote a script, so they took interviews that had been transcribed. We had this wonderful lumberjack software that enabled us to marry all the transcripts to the interviews, so we could easily search, quickly find, sound bites and whatever we needed. So, Patrick helped stringing out the script, and, at that point, a lot of what I was doing was sort of cutting out a lot of the repetition and, cutting down some of the sound bites to make it move at a certain pace, covering stuff with B-roll, and then, of course, cutting in these moments from the deposition to sort of go along with what some of our interview subjects were talking about.
From start to finish, how long did it take?
Well, I think they had me, I think I was on the project for about 22 weeks. It was a 2-hour documentary. But, shooting was such an ongoing process. They were always shooting more interviews. So I think by the time I actually had a script that I was working with, and I was really cutting, Act 1, Act 2, there were 10 acts in the show. I'd say it was more like, 10 weeks that I really spent really bearing down and editing the show. So
and
first,
what was your deliverable and where did it go?
Well, I wasn't involved in the online editing part, but I know that they finished the show in Resolve, did all the color correction, and I think, in the end they just exported a full res, ProRes 422 QuickTime file. Maybe not 422, but it was a digital delivery as far as I know, and that played on A&E actually in October. So.
Yeah, didn't they say they had problem with like Ken Burns effects or something when they exported it, but not much else though, I don't think.
Yeah, I actually didn't really use the Ken Burns effect.
Well, somebody did.
Yeah, no, because there were 2 different documentaries, and it had a similar workflow and everything. But I actually liked Alex 4D's Grow Shrink plugin, which is free, and I highly recommend it. I use that quite a bit for stills, and I believe that translated to Resolve. But I think one of the things we did was export some of the stills as QuickTime files with the animation already, built in, so that some of that might have not had to be done in Resolve at all. It was just already in a QuickTime.
One of the things that I was struck with as you were describing the projects you worked on is they all are of a piece. They tend to be crime-related more than anything else. What is it that appeals to you about the documentaries you decide to edit? How do you decide which ones to do and which ones don't have a story?
I think, I wish I could say I had my choice of 5 different projects all the time, and I'm getting to pick which one I want to do. I think most of these have just kind of fallen into my lap, and I haven't really been picking and choosing necessarily, but, what I like about doing these kind of historical documentaries is I like to think about it, that I'm sort of creating this kind of seminal work on the subject, and I want it to be the end-all, be-all for that particular topic. For a lot of these, there's obviously maybe in some cases dozens of documentaries made on that topic, over the course of years. But I think setting the bar kind of high and saying, want this to be the best, want this to kind of encompass the whole story and leave nothing to be desired, is something I try to, hold myself up to.
Well, do that. You care.
Very
Isn't that
much.
nice? He cares.
Before we run out of time, I want to mention that you've also just worked on a project that you produced and edited called Challenger Disaster Lost Tapes. Where can people go on the web to learn more about the Challenger program as well as the OJ program?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. The Challenger documentary is actually airing on Monday, January 25th at 9 p.m. on National Geographic Channel. If you follow me on Twitter, my Twitter is at David Tillman, DavidTillman, and I'm kind of shouting from the rooftops about this one. So, you'll find all the info you need there. Obviously, you could give it a Google, but it's a really, it's definitely one of my proudest achievements, this documentary. I feel like we really did this subject justice, and I hope people will watch it and learn about what was a terrible tragedy, but ultimately it's an important story.
Yeah, we actually learned a lot, and everything is a lot much safer because of that.
Exactly. And those, those that died, they really were heroes. And as tragic as it was, I think there's something, something there in terms of kind of living your life to do what you can, achieve what you can, and not worrying about any potential consequences.
And David, we will check into that. The website is all one word, davidtillman.com. David is a documentary producer and editor. David, thanks for joining us today. This has been a fascinating visit, and I wish you success going forward.
Thanks, David.
Thanks so much for having me.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. If you'd like to see more videos like this one, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. To stay connected and receive updates from The Buzz, sign up for our free weekly newsletter now. Or you can learn more about us on our website. And thanks for watching The Digital Production Buzz.